Welcome to Talk of Tacoma, and welcome to the 2020 Mayoral Election Forum, sponsored by Tacoma Radio, WOWD, Tacoma Park Community Radio. My name is Eric Bond. I'm the host of Talk of Tacoma, and I will be moderating today's forum. Thank you for tuning in. I will be wearing a mask throughout this forum for those of you who access this through streaming or later on YouTube. This is in keeping with the policies of Tacoma Radio, where we have hosts coming in and out of the studio. The two mayoral candidates, Kate Stewart and Roger Schlegel, will be maskless because they're in their own homes. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are living through an annus horribilis, or a horrible year, as we were all reminded yet again this past Friday. We are simultaneously living through the effects of a global health crisis, an economic crisis, a climate crisis, and a national political crisis. Many of us today are mourning the loss of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This summer, we mourned the passing of another American hero, John Lewis. I have to admit, I even get choked up reading these words. These are difficult and uncertain times, and we surely have more tough times ahead. On top of global and national worries, many people in our community are struggling with household crises, job loss, hunger, worries about immigration status, psychological burdens, illness, and even death. These are grim words for kicking off a discussion of city issues, and none that I've used in the past few decades as I have been moderating forums. I do hope that through the following discussion, glimmers of light will shine through to remind us of why we choose to live in Takoma Park. For the past 50 years, this city has prided itself for being inclusive, for looking out for vulnerable people in our community, and for seeking justice. During this horrible year, the stakes of doing so are higher than I have ever seen. During this election season, we get a chance to reconsider just who we are as a city. So I just wanted to start out with those words. Whatever is happening outside of Takoma Park affects what is happening inside Takoma Park. Due to COVID, for example, the 2020 city election will be conducted through the mail. In the second week of October, registered voters will be mailed a ballot to be marked and returned to a secure ballot box or by U.S. mail. All residents over the age of 16 are eligible to vote in the Takoma Park election, whether or not they are U.S. citizens. You can register to vote at tacomaparkmd.gov/elections. If you have voted in any recent election from your home address in Takoma Park, and if nothing has changed, you should be fine. If you have moved into Takoma Park recently or have moved to a different address in Takoma Park, take a moment to confirm or update your registration. You can again visit tacomaparkmd.gov/elections or email clerk@tacomaparkmd.gov. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge City Clerk Jesse Carpenter and Tacoma TV, Alvaro Calavia and Bienvenido Martinez, who are managing this Zoom meeting and will be rebroadcasting the forum on City TV and YouTube next week. And I will let you know through my channels, and I'm sure others will as well, when that is available. We are planning to provide captioning on the video version when it is available. I believe that we are also streaming at this moment on the City of Takoma Park Facebook page. So you can be listening over the radio or also access it through that Facebook page. So I have asked the community to let me know about the issues that matter most to them. I have composed questions based on those responses. Because these questions are designed for both candidates, I have worded them so the issues are framed broadly, and I leave it to the candidates themselves to draw any distinctions that they may want. And candidates, please do correct me if you feel that if I have mischaracterized any issue. That said, let me explain how this discussion will go. First, each candidate will give an opening statement of 2 minutes. Then I will begin asking questions. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to respond to the topic. Then each candidate will have up to a minute for rebuttal. Then each candidate will have 30 seconds for a last word if desired. When a candidate reaches the limit, I will say time. I ask both candidates to help me keep within those time limits. Now, I had spoken ahead of time to both candidates, Kate Stewart and Roger Schlegel, and with an intention to flip a coin. And as we are entering a world in which we don't carry money around, I grabbed a quarter this morning and realized that when I changed my clothes, I didn't bring the quarter with me. So I'm just going to make a arbitrary decision and ask Roger Schlegel if he will give the first opening statement. Would that work, Roger?
That's fine. Thank you, Eric.
Okay, so whenever you're ready, Roger.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric, Tacoma Radio, and City TV for making this event possible. And Kate, I really look forward to a great debate on these issues. Most of all, thank you to every resident who's taken the time to listen or watch and to think about the real choice we have this year locally. This campaign for me launched 4 weeks ago, and it's been tremendous to see the outpouring of support, the signs sprouting up everywhere, and so many residents listening and learning, myself included, as I travel around through the wards on many streets. I fervently believe that I'm only as good of a leader as I am a listener. And so beginning now in this campaign, but continuing as mayor, I hope to constantly have that attitude of listening. I'm coming into this with a great range of experience and training in public administration, as well as many years of experience as a high school teacher, where I'm focused on consensus building and getting results every day. And I'm excited to come into this debate with a growing sense that in a few weeks I may, in fact, be your mayor. So I ask you to listen to what I'm saying with that idea in mind. I'm stepping up to serve as mayor for this election season because I feel that our elected body, the city council, of whom the mayor is the at-large member, simply needs to exercise clearer oversight and direction with the city manager. And as you'll hear in today's conversation, I'm a practical progressive and I'm a problem solver by nature. I'm a deep listener and I care about getting the details right. So I hope to convince you over the next hour or so that I'm the right choice for mayor, and to convince you to bring your friends and neighbors around to that point of view and to help this movement go forward to make Tacoma Park a joyful problem-solving place once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And let me set up the time again. Kate, are you ready to provide your opening statement?
Sure.
Okay, and whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Eric and Roger. Our city and the country and the world is facing an unprecedented health crisis. Our lives have been turned upside down and inside out. Because of the foundation that we have set in the city with our housing policy, emergency response funds, mini grants, and through the dedication and hard work of businesses, residents, and our staff, we're getting through this crisis together. But we are not on solid ground, and more than ever, our city needs experienced leadership to ensure that our goal of keeping people in their homes, healthy, and businesses running is achieved. We're also facing another pandemic, racism, and our city is not immune from that. Kamala Harris has said there is no vaccine for racism, and our city, and you have to do the work. And that is why, as I look to the future of our community, I don't think about returning to normal. I think about what we can do and do better, reimagining public safety, continuing our fight on climate change, and much more. And through it all, advancing racial equity. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, the daughter of a single mom and a teacher. And because landlords raised our rents every few years, we had to move. We had to leave friends and neighborhoods. And as mayor now, I know what that's like for our community when people have to move when they don't want to. And that's why I've dedicated over the last 5 years working on housing issues. I championed and moved forward our housing strategic plan, began an affordable housing reserve fund in which we now have $1 million, created a down payment assistance program that helps renters move to home ownership by directly tackling the issues of disparities in generational wealth. We are now working in partnership with Habitat for Humanity to create more missing middle housing that are models for sustainable building. And we will and can do more because the work we have done these last 5 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm still trying to get the clock right. I know that Mayor, you deal with this, and the next mayor will have to deal with this as well. Mayor, Kate, since you gave the second statement, I'm going to direct the first question to you. Now, these questions are the same question will be going to both candidates, but you will speak first for 2 minutes, and then Roger will speak for 2 minutes. And as I said before, you have a chance to respond to Roger for 1 minute. He will have a chance to respond to you for 1 minute, and then if either of you have a final word, you will have that opportunity. So, and I also wanted to, I'll be done with announcements in a minute, but apparently you are not live on Facebook, so I want to let you know that. I think that we are hoping to broadcast this later when we have the closed captioning with video. So again, we will let you know about that. So here's the question. Takoma Park was founded in 1883 as a streetcar suburb to Washington, D.C. One of the main purposes of incorporating was to serve the needs of the new residents, such as creating and maintaining roadways and sanitation systems and providing public safety. As Montgomery County developed, Takoma Park remained one of the few self-governing municipalities. What do you see as the purpose and function of the city of Takoma Park as we head into the third decade of the 21st century?
Great. Thanks, Eric, for the question. I see our purpose and our goal to continue the legacy we have in our city, to be forward thinking, to push limits, and to take care of those who live in our community. We have been at the forefront of so much change that takes place not just here in the city, but then across our country. 16 and 17-year-old voting is one example. Having residents who are not U.S. citizens are another example. In addition, looking at our work on sustainability has taken off across the country. We've set ambitious goals, but we also know how to get things done in the short term. For example, this past year, we've looked at how we changed all our streetlights to LED. I've led that battle against Pepco to get our streetlights done, get shields put in, and we're saving energy as well as money in our city. And that is something other cities around Montgomery County want to do as well. And we've looked forward to setting a goal on climate change as well that other cities are looking at across the country. So I believe as we move forward, we continue with those ambitious goals, but we know how to get the short-term work done as well. And we need to make sure that our residents who live here can stay here and thrive. I'm a strong supporter of our rent stabilization, and that's one of the things that we have in our city that is not taking place anywhere else in Montgomery County. And so we need to make sure that we have housing for everyone who wants to live here.
Okay, thank you very much. Roger?
Thanks for that question. Yes, it's interesting that many of our services predate the county being able to provide those services. And as we now are well into our second century as a community, I think it's important that we look to see where we want to place our priorities and how we also want to operate as part of the county. When I look at the development pattern that created Takoma Park as we know it, it's so fascinating to see that residential and social segregation were baked in from the beginning in terms of where our single-family neighborhoods and our multi-unit dwellings were located. And I think that presents us with a tremendous challenge as we always seek to be one Tacoma. because in our larger society, this long-term pattern of systemic racism has led to white people controlling much of the wealth and property. We have a median income of $85,000 or so in town, but hardly anyone is in that middle. We have many people who are far above that, and an equally large number of people who are far below that. So that is our constant challenge of how can we actually be one Tacoma. To me, we must look closely at what services we still want to provide for ourselves, whether that be elements of policing, our public works program, our recreation department, our library, other things that we love that are part of our identity. We also need to be open to exploring where programs such as stormwater or perhaps our criminal investigations unit could be handled by the county without any loss of our identity. It's very important that we do this because we must prioritize our spending if we want to move forward in some substantive ways on the goals that Kate was just talking about. We don't have clear objectives on climate. We're not measuring metrics for racial equity, and we haven't set any firm targets for affordable housing in that crucial middle income price point. Thank you.
If I may respond, I think Roger brought up some excellent points, and it reminded me of why I feel it's so important that we are a city and can do our own laws. You brought up policing. One of the things about our values in the community and making sure we can live up to them is that Montgomery County still does no-knock warrants. And so in my mind, I do not want no-knock warrants being done by our police department. And that is one thing that I think we can live up to our values and make sure that we have control in our own city on things like policing, what we do in the environment and other things, because that means we can truly live up to our values.
Okay, Roger, would you like to respond?
Yes, I think I would go much farther on policing to say that our bottom line should be that we have no police-induced trauma in this community, and that when a person needs help, as least often as possible, it's a police officer with a weapon who shows up to help. I agree. I've talked to many young people who trust our police more than the Montgomery County Police, but I think we need an outside assessment, not just a task force, to determine what the appropriate kinds of services we need to provide broadly as human services. Essentially, we have a need for ecosystem services and human services. And I think in the 21st century, we need to look at how we merge our work teams to accomplish those holistic goals.
Okay, thank you very much. Kate, any last words?
No, we can move on. I'm sure we'll get back to policing.
Well, since we, I'm going to skip ahead to policing then and ask, what should be the function of the police force in Tacoma Park? Do you favor eliminating, reforming, or expanding the functions of our police force, and how? And this will go first to you, Roger.
My response to that is that it's interesting to talk about reimagining public safety, which is an abolitionist term. And I first posted that on my website, and then it was a couple of days later that Kate announced that was her fundamental reason for running. So certainly this is in the air, this idea of reimagining public safety. My feeling is that we absolutely need an outside assessment. The task force that's under consideration right now would have 4 of its 12 or so members associated with the current police department. When I talk to residents around the community, quite a few of them, whether I speak to them in Spanish or English, they talk about not wanting to interact with the police and of having negative interactions with them. This is not just young people who are in a park at night and who are told to leave and who feel racially profiled. It's also older people who have been mugged on their street and feel that the police were not responsive to them. So again, to say what we need to do, I favor looking at policing broadly. Policing in this country has been about protecting white wealth and property for far too long. So reforms and changes in policing must advance the opportunity and the sense of belonging for our Black and Brown and Indigenous and immigrant residents. If police culture needs to change, I think the best way to do it is by changing the functions of our police and moving as many of them away from patrolling, minimizing the number of patrol officers who are on duty at any time so that it meets our small community size. Our police officers, our police department has 64 some employees, costs 40% of our budget, and is much larger per capita than Hyattsville, Bowie, Greenbelt, and it's the only full-service municipal police department in Montgomery County. So we really need to dramatically refashion how we're approaching this issue.
Thank you. Kate?
Great, thanks. So I've been working on police issues in our city for over 6 years. When I first got on the city council, we had a police chief who was photographing Black and brown young men on Maple Avenue, and I got that stopped. We had police officers who were not wearing name tags. We had tinted windows on our police vehicles. All of that has stopped, and our former police chief is very much our former police chief. I also put in place a process where we hired the new police chief, and we had residents give input, particularly Black and brown young men who lived on Maple Avenue, to talk about the future of our police department. So I have a long history here in our city working on these issues. And I do believe that our first priority needs to be the residents and their health and their rights and their safety. Having mental health issues in our community is at an all-time high and a crisis, and we need to figure out a better way to address this. And I've been working with members of the county council and our state delegation to look at ways that we can bring more mental health services to our community. We can partner with the county on crisis interventions teams, but that only goes so far. This is a place where we need to come together in our community and figure out how we're going to get the resources here. And moving forward, I think we have to have these conversations really led by the Black and brown members of our community to hear about their experiences. We've done this before and we can do it again. And we need to see a new model for what we're doing in our community, because we're not going to return to normal after the COVID crisis. We need to see how we can do much better on these issues.
Okay, thank you. Roger, do you have a response?
Yes, I really believe that if we're thinking about how our policing issues have been so clear for so long, it's distressing to me to see how little substantive change our city council and our government have been able to make in the last 5 years. Removing tinted windows and replacing a clearly racist police chief. I saw him on my own street, along with several officers, harassing a Black man about 3 years ago, and I saw him laughing with other officers at a community event and only talking to white residents. I think that those moves are superficial in terms of tackling a culture problem in the department. We've talked about getting more police out on the street, for example, out of their cars, out of that intimidating posture, and I see very little progress. I see that we are up now to a total of 2,000 hours spent with a bike patrol each year. That amounts to one patrol officer in total who's on a bike. We have electric bikes now. I would like to see our officers on the street, but out of cars.
And Kate, do you have a response?
Absolutely. We're making a number of changes in our police department. We've hired new police officers who are much more reflective of our community. In addition, we have officers who are living in our community now, which we didn't have before. There's a lot of cultural change that's happening in our department, but I think that's beside the point, because we need to move towards a new model. We really need to rethink what we're doing. Reform within our department is important because that's what we have right now, but that's tinkering around the edges. What we need is actually to look at the future and what we're doing in this community. And I do believe we need to move forward to a defund model where we are taking resources and putting them in other places. And I am hopeful that the task force will help us inform those next steps. because that's what we need in our community. And we are making great changes right now. And I would just say, ask Roger a question, if I may. You say you want less interaction with police officers, but you're asking for more people, officers, to be on the street.
Okay, and Roger, I imagine you would like a final word.
I did not ask for less interaction with police officers. I said that people are reporting negative interactions with police officers and a lack of relationships. People have compared their experiences with the Metropolitan Police in DC unfavorably with the Tacoma Park Police. We have to look at human needs holistically. People who are facing eviction or foreclosure right now don't have the information they need to feel safe and secure. People who have health issues that they don't know how to address aren't feeling safe and secure. Young people, people of color who don't feel welcome in public places or on streets or in parks, they don't feel secure. All of these things contribute to the public issue. Thank you.
And Kate, do you have a final word?
As I say, there's a lot going on in our community, a lot of anxiety, and we have excellent staff who are working with members of our community outside of our police department. I don't see this necessarily as the role of the police department. We have a very great housing department that works with our tenants, works with renters, and works with our small businesses to meet their needs and to connect them with services. And that's where we need to build and do more.
Okay, thank you. I have some other police questions, but I have so many questions. We may come back to policing. This is obviously a big issue. We're going to get into the budget, and I think that may be another place where we talk about police. But I want to address the health crisis that we're experiencing. Takoma Park has the highest rate of COVID and the highest rates of COVID deaths in Montgomery County. Food insecurity is soaring. Many people are out of work and underemployed and will face eviction when the eviction ban lifts. How does the city sort through all of these issues to address the rising needs in our community? And I believe I go to you first, Kate.
Great. So since the crisis began, we've been really advocating for the community, particularly at the county and state level. It became very obvious at the outset that the county and state were focused on single-family homeowners. All the information that was being put out was focused on that. And right at the beginning, we did Zoom calls and conference calls with people who lived in multifamily buildings in multiple languages. And I was on many of those calls with our staff. And over again, I heard the same questions being asked. And when I asked the county for answers from the public health department, it was really hard to get that information. So working with Delegate Charkoudian, we actually pulled together the information, sent it back to the county, and asked them, can this be what's put out? They never got back to us, but a week later, we found the information actually on the county website. So we were able to put that out to our residents. In addition, I fought for getting pop-up testing in our community, and we were able to do that on New Hampshire Avenue and to prioritize the people who lived in the apartment buildings there before opening up testing more broadly. We connect people to the resources and our businesses in particular. When we saw it was going to take a while for the county and the state to get resources to small businesses, we began a mini grants program. These were $1,000 and $2,000 grants that made all the difference in the world. And right now we're seeing our businesses able to stay open for the time being. And many of them told us that those small grants meant the world to them because many of them were not connected with banks already. And the only way they could actually access money at that time was to go through our mini grants program. So we're advocating at the county and state level. We're putting in place programs ourselves, and we're working with people to make sure that they can stay in their homes. And we're working with landlords as well to make sure that residents can stay in their homes, that they don't get behind on their rent.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Roger, what are your thoughts on how we can address the many issues that we face as a result of the COVID crisis?
Yes, thank you. The COVID crisis was coming at us in March very clearly. And the first thing we needed to do was budget enough money, funds, resources, and staff to effectively address this crisis. The second thing we needed to do was make sure that every resident and business was proactively reached so that they could get the assistance they need or be directed to it. With the budget, it was extremely disappointing that though many residents expressed concern, the city council voted more money for raising staff salaries and benefits than they did for the COVID emergency fund. And in fact, they moved money out of the housing reserve to fund the COVID reserve. So we didn't come into the situation with enough to feel that we could respond to everyone. And at this point, we still haven't drawn down most of that fund, even though people have been going through one of the hardest periods of their lives. I see that there's been a tremendous effort to reach out to businesses, or at least to respond to businesses that have asked for grants. I have not been able to get a transparent report on how much of that aid has gone to the old Tacoma area versus the Crossroads area or the other small areas in town that are not part of business associations, or the many, many home-based businesses that we have. And on the residential side, I have asked repeatedly, along with many other residents, for proof that the city has reached out to every multi-unit dwelling and knows that conditions are safe there, knows that landlords are doing what they have to do, and knows that residents, regardless of what language they speak, have been directed to the appropriate resources. I have not seen that kind of comprehensive approach or any detailing of staff to help achieve that. So I think our response has been limited so far.
Kate, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would actually like to just, one point, no money was removed out of the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. I fought very hard for that actually during the budget. No money was removed from that for our COVID fund. So I just want to make sure that is understood. In addition, there is a PowerPoint on the city website that our economic development manager put together that shows the breakdown of the businesses that were helped in the Crossroads versus Old Town Business Authority. And this is something that was really important because, and one of the reasons we started the mini grant program, because we know the Old Town Business Association already had this established. And we were really focused on our businesses in the Crossroads and actually partnered with the Latino Economic Development Corporation to help us, in particular, take in applications that were in Spanish only, which they could not do in other places. Finally, the other thing regarding landlords, I advocated with the housing folks to make sure it was mandatory that information was provided in multiple languages in the buildings, because they were only saying they had to provide guidance at the county level. And I got it changed so it was mandatory.
Okay, Roger?
Yes, I believe that when I looked at the website most recently, if I did not speak English, I would not see a clear path to understanding what's available to me. Certainly in the city newsletter that's mailed to every household, I'm seeing the information in English, which I find inadequate, particularly when we look at the people who are suffering the most through this pandemic. I'm also concerned that with our housing fund and our assistance program, we are concentrating that, or the city is looking right now to concentrate large grants just for, I believe, 2 households to try to purchase. And it's not really clear whether they even live in the city. It looks to me like we need to be much more creative and resourceful in helping people get through what's on the horizon in terms of eviction and foreclosure dangers. And that includes landlords who are having trouble paying their property taxes because they've forgiven rent payments from their tenants.
Thank you. Kate, do you have a final word?
Sure, absolutely. Our website was one of the first in the country to actually be able to be translated into Amharic and a number of other different languages. Almost all of our materials are translated into other languages, and we actually send those out to residents in the multifamily buildings. And so that was something we began very early on in COVID with the postcard that was sent out to everyone in the community in multiple languages. It's one of our core priorities is to make sure that we have all information available in multiple languages.
I'm sorry, the timing is always kind of hard to get exactly right, question by question, but that was 30 seconds. Roger, do you have a final word?
My final word is that we need to be taking this very seriously and detailing staff. I said it before, we should be detailing staff. The few staff we have who are working full-time on the pandemic are up to their ears just fielding calls. So it's on a first come, first served basis so often. And I don't see why we can't have people from planning or other people in housing and economic development or police officers or recreation people involved in a comprehensive effort to reach out to all of our residents who are in dire straits.
Thank you. Yeah, some of these questions, it seems like we could use another minute. For now, we'll stick to the 30 seconds, and then we'll see if we need to add that extra minute. I want to turn to city management, which was a topic that many residents contacted me about. Policy in Tacoma Park is established by the mayor and city council, while the day-to-day operations are overseen by a city manager. Our current city manager is retiring in 2021. What should be the role of the city manager? What will you look for in the next city manager? Would you be willing to reduce the city manager's salary? And I believe, Roger, you are going first on this one.
Thank you. Yes. The more I talk to people around town, the more this comes out in every neighborhood as a key concern. We have a council manager form of government, a structure that I'm very familiar with and was trained in. I understand how the management side works. They are brought into the profession and up through the ranks, knowing always ask for more than you need, and then when your elected officials argue you down a bit, everyone can claim victory. My observation of Takoma Park over the past 5 years and beyond has been that our city council is in a far too deferential position to the manager. They don't have transparent access to the information they need, and they are not holding the manager accountable for failures, such as failing to apply for a $250,000 grant in time for the dog park, or for proposing to sell a perfectly good recreation department vehicle that had 26,000 miles on it, or for giving consultants large contracts without clear scope of work. We have 172 employees. 23 of them at this point are supervisors or managers. Many are paid well over $100,000. Our city manager at $250,000, including a bonus. Our police chief at the same level. For the next city manager, and the process for that search will begin immediately for the new council, I'm looking for someone who understands outcome-based budgeting, who can handle developing the metrics to give the council its oversight role effectively, and who is willing to accept a much lower salary and live in the city. I do not think that it's appropriate to pay our city manager more than the county executive makes, who actually pays taxes in Tacoma Park, by the way. I have already said about how I would reorganize, but my main point is that the core function of the city manager, city council, is to provide clear direction and oversight to the manager on behalf of all the residents.
Okay. Thank you very much. Kate?
Great, thanks. As we look to the next year, we do have an opportunity with hiring of a new city manager. Just like our elections, the hiring of a new city manager is absolutely a great opportunity to review our priorities, look at our processes, and how things are going in the city. We do have a city manager, city council form of government, which means the city manager is the day-to-day person who oversees how the city functions and follows through on the policies that are set by the city council. So moving forward, I think it's important to have folks on our city council that will look for someone who is innovative, who will push the envelope, who knows our city and our values, and will make sure that throughout all the work that they do, that will be reflected. I also think, I have had a lot of experience in my life running a small business, being the executive vice president of a nonprofit, and now working and overseeing a number of younger staff. Managing people is very important, and I like to look for a city manager who really nurtures others, leaders on our city staff. And as well as when they hear about a problem, I want to know how they're going to answer the question, how can we fix this? Lots of times people answer a question and say, oh, we don't have the money, we can't do this. And they look at all the reasons not to do something. Well, what I want to look for in our next city manager is someone who says, how can we solve these problems? And who is going to be most affected by things in our community and the problems we can solve for them? I want to know there's going to be somebody who's going to roll up their sleeves, work hard with us, and move us forward in the direction we need to go.
Thank you. Roger, do you have a response?
Sure. My feeling is that we've had 5 years to have that kind of a city manager under Mayor Kate's leadership, and we haven't gotten there. Our city manager continues to, even on this new budget that was just released, this new version of the budget, not make it clear how much spending for personnel costs is going up. 4.5% increases are what the city manager is expecting to achieve through the union negotiations. There's only a 2.5% employee cost index increase expected this year. But the manager on top of that wants to give everyone 1.5% step increases.
Public option.
And some additional monies for people to get multiple step increases for outstanding work. So I believe that the oversight function of the council just isn't being met, and residents I talk to all over town who've served on committees and task forces are frustrated that their responses to the challenges they're asked to evaluate are not received well by staff.
Thank you very much. Kate, do you have a response?
Sure. Over the last few years, we've put in a number of different changes, whether it's the budget, and now we're looking at how our committees function. For example, on the budget, when I first got on the council, I was handed 2 big binders and said, be at a meeting the next day. Right now, we have a lot more information online. We can see exactly how much does composting cost, where things break down. We still have a lot of work to do. We're not quite where I wanted to be this year. Because of COVID and other things, we had a long list of how we wanted to improve the budget document to provide more transparency and also answer residents' questions that I've heard over the years. But I believe we're making progress over the last few years in our budgeting process and in a number of other ways as well.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a final word, Roger?
Yes, I wanted to mention that I served on the city manager search committee as co-chair with Kathy Porter several years ago. So I know how the search process works and how it ought to involve residents. I feel that this city manager we currently have has really not made substantive changes in how our budget is tied to our strategic plan, and that Mayor Kate, despite committing to doing that, has not led the council to demand that kind of an approach over the last several years.
So I'd like to
go ahead.
Over the last couple of years, what we started was in January, we have priority meetings where we set out the goals for the city council, and then that is used by each of the departments to write their budgets and come back to us. So we've actually looked at now when we go through our budget, it's much easier to say, does this program, does this policy forward one of the priorities for the city? And we make much better decisions than we've made prior to the last few years, because we have set up a set of priorities in which we can measure our budget.
Thank you. Speaking of the budget, obviously the budget and taxes, unsurprisingly, is a topic of great interest for many residents. And Over the past 4 years, the city property tax rate has remained essentially unchanged. However, city revenue has increased in part because of increased assessments. Many city residents are concerned that they're paying more dollars in taxes. Given the economic crisis that many residents face due to COVID and other reasons, do you think that it is appropriate to cut taxes in the next budget cycle? And I think, Kate, you are first.
Great, thanks. My goal is to create and sustain a community where anyone who wants to can live and thrive. I do not see as a goal cutting taxes across the board because I believe that only helps those who have more in our community. Instead, we need to look at targeted tax rebates and tax programs that really help those most in need. What we need to put in place is a progressive tax system and not make our taxes even more regressive than they are right now. As this municipality, we rely mainly on property taxes as our source of revenue, but there are other ways we need to also look at expanding that. And in particular, over the last couple of years, the staff has done a great job and in cooperation with the City Council to get new grants. So for example, we had a $100,000 state grant for new facade work on Long New Hampshire Avenue. We just got a over $400,000 grant for new bikeways planning along New Hampshire Avenue. These are just two examples of ways that when we have appropriate city staff who are experienced, who know how to go after grants in place, that we are able to diversify the revenue we have in the city. And so I believe we need to look at ways in which we help those residents who are in need right now, because I know there are residents in need, and we need to do that in a targeted way to make sure we're truly helping them and not just cutting across the board, which will give us fewer resources to help those most in need in our community.
Thank you. Roger?
I believe the problem of the high taxes is much more urgent than the mayor has just described. We have on my street longtime residents who moved to West Virginia this past year because they simply were on fixed incomes at that point in life and could not afford the property taxes. That was the reason. I've also talked to many young people who happen to be home right now from college or from their first jobs because of the pandemic, and they recognize that there's no affordability for them to buy in Takoma Park. We are not serious yet about finding middle-level housing or about bringing down our taxes so that at least on that marginal level, we are making it more affordable for people as we can control. In this recession year, our city council voted, yes, after residents' pressure, they voted to keep the property tax rate the same, but the effective increase for the average homeowner was 3.3%. And we've seen property taxes rise above the level of inflation 4 out of the last 5 years. And the average over those 5 years is that property taxes have gone up twice the rate of inflation. This is not sustainable. It's splitting our community apart. And I would like to add that newer residents who paid a lot for their homes are suffering too, with hefty mortgages, planning for college savings, caring for aging parents. This is an across-the-board crisis where we actually have to get serious about setting our priorities for our spending and making sure we have a city manager who knows how to manage in that direction to that end.
Thank you. Kate?
Sure. So I agree this is an urgent issue, and we have programs in place. Last year, we helped 150 families with tax rebates, and that totaled over about $160,000. But we need to expand those programs, and there is urgency there. In addition, home ownership is just one piece of affordability in our community. We do have rent stabilization in the city, and in fact, when we look regionally, we have the most affordable rents across our region. We need to continue supporting people and helping them move who want to from renting to home ownership. And that's why the home stretch down payment assistance program is so important in our community and looking for ways to expand that. And we are looking at ways to increase what is called missing middle housing by partnering with Habitat for Humanity in creating that, and also doing accessory dwelling units. These are apartments people can put in their homes, and we advocated for changes at the county level and now supporting people to create more of those so that they can fit in the community.
Roger?
I think that if you don't set a clear objective, you will not get there. My objective for Tacoma Park regarding housing would be that anyone who has grown up here or who has lived here for a number of years would not reach a point in their life where they have to move away. To me, that's not a real town. A real town is a place where you can live out the length of your life. And we need to have some serious conversations that we've deferred. Conversations about race, class, neighborhood, and talking about where we actually want to locate this middle level and truly affordable housing in our community. We have lots of great sites where it could happen. New Hampshire Avenue, underused institutional land in town, and other places around the crossroads, but we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past and have a concentration of housing that leads to residential or social segregation.
Okay, thank you. Kate, do you have a final word?
Sure. I would just say that I truly believe in targets and putting together a strategic plans to help us move forward. That's why I push us to adopt our Affordable Housing and Economic Strategic Plan. I serve on the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments board, and housing is also a regional issue, and we help to put in place the regional affordable housing targets and looking at ways in which Takoma Park can help move that target also regionally. So we have in place a great strategic plan that we're moving forward with, and yeah.
And Roger? I have to disagree that we have in place a strategic plan for affordable housing and economic development. I actually did the numbers. I saw that the plan says we want to align with regional targets. So I got out my calculator. We are committed as of last November by 2030 to have roughly 400 new affordable housing units, 200 moderately priced units, and 200 market priced units in this city. 9 years to go, and I haven't seen any significant movement in that direction.
Okay, thanks to both of you. We are closing in on the end of our first hour, surprisingly to me, and you know, I have pages and pages of questions, so we'll see how far we get on each of these issues. I do think that it's appropriate at this moment to take a short break. First of all, I need to do a station identification. You're listening to WOWD, Tacoma Park Community Radio. This is Talk of Tacoma. I'm Eric Bond, the host, and I'm here from 1 to 3 every Sunday. And this Sunday I'll be going until 4 o'clock as we have a Ward 3 election forum following this forum. And I'm going to take a little bit of a break with a song. This is a song, if you were listening last week, Jamie Raskin, our representative in Congress, rewrote Maryland, My Maryland, which is notorious for being perhaps the most racist state song in the United States. And these are lyrics by Jamie Raskin, sung by a high school student at Northwestern High School. So I'll play this song and then we'll come back to the forum. All right, Maryland, My Maryland, not to the tune of O Tannenbaum, and which I'll be glad of if this does in fact become our new state song. And just to let you know, that is London Mava, who is a student at Northwestern High School singing. Jamie Raskin wrote this, and the music was composed by Steve Jones of Washington Rebels. You're listening to Talk of Tacoma here on WOWD, Tacoma Park Community Radio. I'm your host, Eric Bond, and today I am moderating a forum for the upcoming Tacoma Park, Maryland elections, the mayoral race, talking with Roger Schlegel and Kate Stewart, who are vying for that office. And we will see how far we get along my list of questions before we need to wrap things up for the next forum happening at 3 o'clock. Turning to the next topic, let's see, we're all here. The library and the rec center on New Hampshire Avenue, and the library being much farther along. In response to a 214 needs assessment, the City Council initiated plans to renovate the library. Originally planned to occupy the same footprint, subsequent plans have elevated the library to account for the floodplain and have expanded the square footage to include an atrium that supports the recreation department. For the library project, the city has a $7 million 30-year state bond taken out 2 years ago. Given the limitations of dealing with the floodplain, do you favor continuing with this project, or do you favor scrapping it, even if it means that we may lose the city library? And I've lost track of who spoke last. I think it was you, Roger.
Was it the budget question? It might have.
It was the budget question.
I think I went first.
Okay, so Roger, you can respond first to the library question.
Great. I'm so happy about this question. I was in Ward 2 yesterday, and I talked to a couple of residents who had been on a Zoom call with Kate, and I think Kate had the wrong impression that I'm opposed to the library renovation project. Absolutely not. I'm a huge library lover, and my family has relished the opportunity to be in the library for years. And I see the library as essential public space that brings together people across racial, ethnic, language, geographic lines, age in our city. So I really want to see a vibrant center there for discovery and dialogue in the great tradition of libraries. I have looked at the idea of, as some people say, why can't we just use the Silver Spring libraries? But I'm firm in saying that we need our own library here because it's long been such a central part of our identity. I have a nuanced approach to projects and initiatives, and sometimes people don't realize what the details are. So when I look at the details of the library project at this point, I ask that big question of why has it gone up to 12 million plus instead of 4 million that it was set to be initially. That's money that could be going towards other priorities. The questions that have arisen for me are three. First, when I study the floodplain evaluation, I do see that the library is too low to handle 100-year floods. However, I don't see any investigation of regrading the intersection at Maple and Philadelphia to route water around the property. All I see is an expensive raising of the entire structure. The second thing I'm concerned about is mission creep. And I've heard the city manager say that money for the library project could actually be allocated to building new staff space or communications related facilities anywhere in the community center. So I'm concerned about our history of losing track of projects. And finally, on design details, I agree with my daughter who says, I like a cozy library. I don't need fancy. And while I love the bold architectural touches, I think we need to focus on what is the mission of a library, especially for our children, and how can it best achieve that within a budget.
Thank you. And sorry that alarm is so jarring.
Fine.
Kate, what are your thoughts on where we go from here on the library?
Great. I have been a long advocate of doing the renovation of the library since I first got on the city council. I see our library, and libraries mean a great deal to me. As I mentioned before, growing up in Brooklyn, libraries were a refuge for me. It was a place to go, a safe place, a place to learn, a place just to be. And that's what our library is for so many young people in our community, because it's walking distance from 3 of our schools. It's an easy place for parents to go with young children. We have programming that no other library in our region has, in Amharic, in Spanish, and in French. So for me, our library is really at the heart of so much that goes on in our community and represents so much. The libraries are also being held together by duct tape, as I like to say. And actually, the assessment was done in 2013. And it found at that time that we are not ADA compliant. It's too small for the programming. Our current heating and air conditioning systems are likely to fail at any moment. And it's not energy efficient. And we've known that since 2013. And so I do believe we need to move forward with the library and do this renovation, because I'm afraid we might lose this treasure in our community. I also think it's an opportunity to do some of the upgrades that need to be done. And in particular, things like bathrooms. They're not ADA compliant. And actually, I really want our bathrooms in our community center to not be gendered, he or she. I think we should have bathrooms that, again, reflect the values in our community. And that's where some of the money is going to go for as well. In addition to looking at the money that we've borrowed, we also have money that we were able to get from the state. We have $300,000 that we lobbied hard for, and our delegation helped us get for the renovation of the library. Right, my time's up.
Okay, thank you. Roger, do you have further thoughts?
Sure, yeah, I don't dispute the need for a state-of-the-art library. All I'm saying is that we have to be really prudent about how much we pay and what we choose to pay for in our big projects. We are talking about expanding from 9,000 some square feet to 19,000. I wonder whether there's space in the community center that could be repurposed or reprogrammed, particularly if we found ways to make our staff more efficiently allocated in their time. Part of what we're trying to build with this library is a sufficient space for teens to be together. And if you have lived here long enough, you remember that the community center was supposed to provide that space. So this mission creep that continues is bothersome. I also would like to say that we have to be focused on programmatic objectives. So if our objective is to help kids after school and before school, let's make sure we can do that for kids all over town. I was happy to be at the rec center public process the other day and thinking about that.
Great. I would just say, in my experience being in, when we could, before COVID, is we need space for community gatherings for not just children, but across our community. And again, not just here, but also on New Hampshire Avenue. Space is really limited. And as we move forward, thinking about how our world needs to change now because of COVID, space is going to be also much more needed. And the library is so much more. It is a gathering. Sorry. That was loud.
30 seconds comes quickly. Roger?
Yes, we do need flexible space, and COVID has changed everything. And I'm sure that Mayor Kate has also heard about people looking for childcare spaces right now. We have a beautiful potential for the public space at the Junction to be able to be flexible in those kinds of ways. And so I think if we're going to be consistent about our thinking here, we really need to be examining whether we're achieving what we want in terms of flexible community space at the Junction.
Okay, thank you. And we will be turning to the Junction in just a minute. I would actually like to turn back to taxes and more importantly, revenue before we move on, as we're talking about this project. And you mentioned, Roger, that the New Hampshire Avenue Recreation Center is under a renovation project as well. Acknowledging that city residents are that many city residents are having difficulties with tax rate and rising taxes. What are your thoughts? And this will go to Kate as well on increasing revenue in other ways than taxes or cutting services in some way? That's
a big question.
Yeah, I guess, as I ask it because, there's people would like to pay fewer taxes, but we do enjoy many services in this city. So, if we were to cut or if we were to expand services, where can we find other revenue?
All right, yes. Well, we have to be very thoughtful about the fact that less than half of our tax revenue comes from property taxes in town. So much of it is transferred back to us through intergovernmental revenue. We have to be really thoughtful about our intergovernmental revenue sources from the county and the state. In this past budget cycle, we were not. We heard the city was not. We heard the state and county saying that their revenue was going to be way down, but we gambled on getting the same amount and even a $200,000 increase in our police reimbursement for FY21. We'll find out in a couple of weeks how things are going. But everyone knows about the term tax duplication who pays taxes in Takoma Park. That's a huge potential source of revenue. My contention, as I've been talking about the need for program-based, outcomes-based budgeting, is that when we have clear metrics and we can show where our money is going, we will be able to make the case effectively to the county of what the proper reimbursement formula should be for the services we provide ourselves. That is job one. And then job two is going from 23 managers to fewer by combining our governmental departments into ecosystem services, human services, and then oversight and evaluation services. I really think that for the 21st century, we need to have a staff that's much more nimble, and I think that can be done more cost effectively as well. Commercial economic development is certainly, I imagine, going to be coming our way along the New Hampshire Avenue corridor, and my contention there, as with the Junction, is simply that we must uphold our values and make sure that our commercial development, insofar as it increases our commercial tax base, is community-oriented and is aligned and harmonized with our big goals as a community.
Thank you. For some reason, the timer didn't go off, but thank you. Kate, are there ways that we can raise revenue and potentially lower taxes for the city?
Great. So again, I will just say that my goal is not lowering taxes across the board. I've said it on the city council. I believe as a community, we should be looking at how we help those most in need. And how we do that is put in place targeted tax rebate and assistance programs. And we need to make sure we can continue to fund those and make sure we can continue to have things like rent stabilization in our community and other programs. So how do we do that across the board? I do believe we need to look at increasing our commercial tax base, and most importantly at this time, making sure that our small businesses can stay open and continue to pay their taxes. I will also say that, as I mentioned before, grants are very important to the city. It's how we were able to finish up and do the Flower Avenue Green Street project. It's how we did the Ethan Allen Gateway project as well. And so, again, we have a $100,000 grant from the state that we received because we have a terrific economic development manager on staff right now. And so that's one of the things, is making sure that we have the staff in the right positions to help us leverage that. The other thing is, I instead of talking so much about cutting things, I think we need to make sure that we're spending our revenue wisely and meeting the needs of our residents. And I've proposed doing participatory budgeting, where that means we get more members of our community engaged in the budgeting process and thinking about how we can spend certain pieces of our budget. It may be a little complicated to go into in 30 seconds, but I do have a blog on it if people are interested in it. Participatory budgeting is something I would really like to move forward with in the city and have been working with a number of residents on.
Okay, thank you very much. Roger, do you have a response?
Sure. I mean, the council is the participatory budgeting group when you get right down to it. The residents are like the council to take the lead in hearing their needs, prioritizing the needs, and then providing that clear direction in the form of a strategic plan and a budget that's tied to it. We are still at the point, after all these years, of our city manager being able to say to the council at budget time, if you cut a position, you cut a program, which is simply saying, like the Wizard of Oz, don't look at the person behind the curtains, Don't ask how the program is done, just keep funding the positions. I'm really calling for and will push for a change to that approach. We have been talking here about tax rebates, and let's just remember, you need to cut something somewhere if you're going to do tax rebates, or else you're raising taxes even higher for the people who currently can afford them.
Thank you. Kate?
Great. We provide tax rebates now in the city, as I said before, to 150 families, over 100, I think it was $160,000 last year. I don't think we need to look at where we're putting our resources and helping those most in need in our community. For me, that's the first thing, is who's in need and how do we get them the help that they need in our community? Because I think that best reflects the values of our community. If we want to live in a diverse and inclusive community, for folks who may have more, and right now living in a single family home, like you have more than somebody who's renting, because what happens for them is much more tenuous in the next few months. And so I think it's really prioritizing those who are most in need in our community. And I think that's what our government does best. It's helping people, it's providing that safety net and making sure that we can stay a community and everyone a part of it.
Okay, thank you. Roger, final word?
Yes, if we're talking about making sure that our spending is going to those in need, I really think that, again, with proper metrics and measurement, we ought to be able to know whether we have ward or neighborhood equity in terms of how our resources and our staff time are distributed. We don't know right now whether residents in Ward 6 are getting, on a per capita basis, the same kind of results from the city that people in, say, Ward 1 or 2 or 3 are, who are much more politically active.
Thank you. And Kate?
I would just say, no, actually, I don't believe residents in Ward 6 are actually getting, and that's something that we've been looking at. And again, it's part of the racial equity work we do, and why we're moving away from complaint-based systems in our city to more proactive systems. Because complaint-based systems, you'll see, are inherently, we help people who are wealthier, who have time on their hands, who know the system, who don't experience cultural barriers. So shifting how the government functions and doing that, and we've begun to do that in a number of respects.
Thank you. Well, we are now an hour and 20 minutes into the forum, and we are just now getting to Tacoma Junction. Tacoma Junction has been a source of much contention over the years. The city acquired the Zarpus lot in 1994, if my research is correct, with the expectation of development. In 2012, the Tacoma Junction Task Force recommended that the city implement a plan for a community/entrepreneurial space or community development on the lot. In 2014, the city sent out a request for proposals, and in 2016, it signed an agreement with Neighborhood Development Company, which then drafted plans for a 2-story development on that lot. This winter, sorry for being long-winded, this winter, the council is expected to review updated plans from NDC based on input from various agencies. Meanwhile, over the past several years, some members of the community have expressed opposition to the continuation of the project because of concerns about the viability of the co-op during and after construction, and other concerns as well, for example, about increased traffic and congestion. What is the best course of action for the city regarding this lot at this point? And Kate, I think you are up.
Great, thanks. So Eric, as you outlined, and we've been talking about this area of our city for decades, our community has been discussing it, and I think there's some things we can all agree on. We want to increase walkability, increase the vitality of the area, and we want to support the co-op and make sure that it continues as the anchor in that area. Multiple city councils over the last few years have voted for moving the project that we now have in front of us forward throughout a process. And I support continuing the process. Right now, the current draft site plan is before the planning department doing a technical review. I think we're learning a lot as we go through that process, and I believe it's one we should continue. Because before anything happens, the draft site plan will come back to the city council for review. And again, an opportunity for members of our community to look at it before the planning board sees it. The last action that the city council took on this was in July of 2018, in which we spelled out a number of requirements. And I really want to emphasize they're requirements. They're not like nice things we'd like to see, but we had very specific requirements around stormwater treatment, significantly exceeding the city requirements, around LED Gold certification or higher, accommodating the co-op's needs. These requirements, as well as requirements we had in our development agreement, still stand, and it's how we'll be evaluating the project when it comes back to us. And I just want to do a thank you and a shout out to Bill Coolis, who it's on the city website now, but spent the last couple of weekends putting together a diagram of a timeline and different pieces that, for those of us like myself who are a very visual learner, is super helpful in seeing this process and where everyone can plug in and how it will go. So, thank you.
Thank you. Roger, what are your thoughts on the best course of action at this point with the Tacoma Junction project?
Great. Well, as you know, I served on the Tacoma Junction task force, and I was drawn to that work because I knew it would probably be one of the most contentious issues in the city. And Kate, perhaps you remember that after you were elected Ward 3 council member, you and I took a walk around the junction. And because of my knowledge from working on the task force, I showed you all the nuanced issues, from ingress, egress for a parking lot, crosswalk, bus stop location, bike share, status of the woods behind, traffic flow, parking for neighborhood businesses, on and on and on. And it was gratifying to me that when you introduced the resolution to negotiate with NDC, all those elements were included. However, in the intervening years, the city has stood by while the developer has made very few modifications to meet the city's requests. Public space has gotten smaller and smaller, and the building got much bigger from the original 20,000 something square foot design that the developer had proposed. So I've made my views very clear, and you can go to rogerfortacoma.com, my website, to see all the detailed ways in which I oppose the plan in its current form. That being said, I think that we've had this kind of backwards community process for 7 years now, and I think it's very clear what people want as the consensus. They want a sizable, flexible public space. They want to guarantee that the co-op's functional needs are met, and even for any grocery store that will be there for the future. And they want some additional dining option and maybe a little bit of retail that really supports local entrepreneurs. To me, it's crucial that what happens at the junction harmonize with our new climate goals, with our racial equity goal, and with our goal of maintaining affordable retail.
Thank you, Roger. Kate?
Sure. I just wanted to add also on the point of having local businesses there. I absolutely agree with that. And in addition, having more local businesses there will help the businesses we have already. And I think COVID-19 has really shown us the importance of having local businesses, places that we can walk to close by, and the work that the co-op has done throughout this crisis. I just want to say thank you so much to Mike Houston, the general manager there, and the board for really stepping up and benefiting our community. And I also want to mention that when we did pass the resolution in July of 2018, I pushed forward for another requirement to make sure that if the project does move forward, that there would not be any chain retail there, that we would really be emphasizing local businesses.
Thank you. Roger?
Thank you. Yes. Well, the emphasis on the requirement for local businesses is actually local or regional, which could be construed as anything that operates across several states, perhaps, as a chain. I'm really interested in neighborhood goods and services. The Montgomery County Master Plan identifies that commercial node as ideal for not destination businesses, but neighborhood goods and services. The great vision that we all should have for Takoma Park is of a 20-minute community where the things you need are within a 20-minute walk of your home. That's how we become greener. That's how we create new wealth building opportunities for Black and Brown and immigrant residents. And the Junction, being at the geographic center, is right where we need to be pushing to make that happen. Staff and council members have been meeting weekly with NDC over the past few years. And so my question is, why has the plan they've now brought forward not made any significant changes to reflect these strong community values?
Thank you.
These conversations have been happening.
Thank you. Kate, do you have a final word?
Yeah, in 30 seconds, I guess I would say
okay,
that.
Tell you, you know what? Let's go to a minute for both of you here.
Yeah, it's okay. No, I would just say that again, since it was my amendment that put in the resolution, it very clearly talked about local and had a limit on the number of other locations that could be there. So we really are talking about, like, say, the new Brazilian bakery that opened on New Hampshire Avenue. You could, because they have two other locations very nearby, that's the type of business we're talking about that we want to attract here. So it was structured in the sense to make sure we are getting local businesses, but not excluding places that may have other sites. So I think we could probably spend, I think our differences on the Junction are pretty clear. I want to continue with the process. I feel like we have requirements on the table. Until I know that this project is not able to meet those requirements, I think we're learning a lot throughout this process. And so even if this project itself doesn't go forward, whatever may come in the future, we'll learn from the process we have right now. We are receiving...
Thank you. And Roger, I gave Kate a minute, so you have a minute.
Sure. We do not have guarantees. The city has given a 99-year lease. So the city can't control, once it's built, they can't control whether it's the Brazilian bakery or an East Coast regional chain. Furthermore, the city has not yet gotten NDC to show how many guaranteed parking spaces will be maintained for surrounding businesses, which has been a crucial function of that area for years and years. The scope of work is the NDC city agreement. And at this late stage, that scope of work is so far from being met that I question whether the city is acting as a representative of the people's interests or more aligned with this corporate developer. And remember, the land was first purchased to prevent a corporate-style development from happening there. Pushing so hard for the intersection to be reconfigured just to make the developer's plan work, to me, is a short-sighted goal, and we could talk at length about that as well. But residents need to know now is the time to give your input to the planning board staff.
Okay, thank you very much. Roger, according to the 2019 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, Tacoma Park plans to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. Do you think that this can be both attainable and affordable? What changes, additions, or subtractions would you make to the plan?
Yes, thank you. I am a lifelong studier of the climate crisis going back to the 1980s. I teach a course over the past several years that's about how human communities are responding, most particularly to the threat of climate change and its impact on our transportation, migration, and food systems. So I took great interest in the development of the climate action plan by the city. And I really feel that while it focuses on building modifications, it fails to be comprehensive at this point. Our largest source of carbon emissions is transportation. And the plan does not give clear direction in terms of how we can get people out of their cars and into shuttles and other forms of transit, as well as bicycles. So this is where I'm pushing, and where I intend to push as mayor, is I'm making sure that plan is comprehensive, that it encompasses transit as well as all kinds of ways to sequester carbon in our trees and in our soil. With respect to building modifications, I find the plan unimaginative and unresourceful, as it simply would dictate to property owners that they make major modifications on their own dime. And I've researched ways that can allow property owners to creatively finance changes that are needed and to have those cost savings that are achieved pay for the loan over the course of time, and even to sign that portion of the loan over to a subsequent building owner when the time comes. Last, I think we can activate public land and public space much better for solar, geothermal, and other kinds of energy generation locally.
Okay, thank you. Kate, do you think that this plan is both attainable and affordable?
Great. Well, first, I want to say a huge thank you to all the residents who helped put this plan together and worked with our sustainability manager. We had the Tacoma Park Committee on the Environment, our Youth Council, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, the Maryland Sierra Club, Takoma Park Mobilization, as well as a group of technical experts appointed by Montgomery County for its own climate action planning process. Support this plan that we put forward. And I just want to say we have a huge amount of expertise in our community on this, and I'm glad they took many hours to provide input. It is an ambitious plan, and I think moving forward, we need to set ambitious goals if we're going to fight something as in what is a crisis right now on climate change. And we just look around our own community at the stormwater issues we're having and across the country with the fires in California, and we know we need to do our part. And when we looked at what we could most impact in the short term, it was looking at our buildings. We also know we have to work on transportation. That's why we're looking at bikeways projects around the city and doing short-term things like supporting businesses that moved from being a gas station to electric vehicle charging station. When I became mayor, one of the first things I did was help the city put through electric vehicle charging stations, because in fact, we didn't have any at that time. And I was really shocked at that. So there's short-term things we can do, like things like put in place electric vehicle charging stations. And then we have these more ambitious goals. And we need to make sure that everyone is part of this plan. And that's why I pushed forward when we passed the resolution in March to create a sustainability fund to provide assistance to residents across the country as we make these changes, and landlords.
Okay, thank you. Roger, would you like to add anything?
Oh, certainly. The consulting firm that ran the process, and I participated in the process along with many, many other residents and local experts, their scope of work allowed them strictly or primarily to focus on data about stationary sources in buildings. And that's why there was not a look at lifestyle choices that people make, food choices, and transportation choices, as well as the practices people use in their land or with our tree canopy program. And so I don't think it was comprehensive. Transit is, you're talking about low-hanging fruit. I would oppose any early requirements that would trickle down to affect renters, because renters, if you think about it, who use transit, who live in efficient buildings, are already living much more efficiently than people in homes who drive cars. I would really focus on surveying transit users and car users to find out what are the trips we're actually taking, where do we want to go on a daily, weekly basis, and
Thank
what
you.
can we do to get us out of our cars. Let's work interjurisdictionally for that. Sorry, thanks.
Kate?
Sure. I also want to say that, when we're looking at climate change, there are things we can do here in our community. And there's also a lot we need to partner with the county and also look at Annapolis. Community choice energy is something that I worked with Delegate Charkoudian in the last legislative session to really help push forward. I'm hoping this year that we can get something through the state legislature so that here in Montgomery County, here in Tacoma Park, we have more choices on our energy, who we used for energy generation. And that's something that we also need to be part of. And one of the things that I'm really proud of our city council right now, because we do a great job partnering with our delegation, with members of the county council. So as we're looking at these issues that, they don't just sit here in Takoma Park, but they are regional and national issues that we're pushing forward for that kind of change as well.
Okay, thank you. Roger, do you have a final thought?
Yes, certainly we're not an island, and certainly we need to work at different levels of government to get the changes we seek. I would just simply say that all of the things we do here need to be integrated with that climate goal. At the Junction, for example, if we reconfigure the intersection, the traffic modeling shows that we would have increased capacity for cars, which would lead to more traffic moving through the corridor in short order, as people turn to their navigation apps. So the city has been very interested in exploring that possibility with the developer. It remains unclear to me how that would help in terms of our climate goal.
And Kate?
No, I don't. No, I'm good. Let's move on.
Okay, all right. Kate, the next question begins. Put this to you first. Approximately 18,000 individuals live in Takoma Park. 49% are white, 35% are Black, and 14% are Latino. There are stark differences between the needs and interests in the different wards, with residents from wards 1, 2, and 3 most often heard during public hearings. Oh, sorry. How will you reach out to the wards less heard?
So how would we reach out to the wards?
How will you reach out to the wards less heard?
Great. Well, this is something that we've started over the last couple of years, doing it formally and informally. One is, as soon as I became mayor, we started holding our regular city council meetings that we have on Wednesday nights. We started holding some of them at the rec center on New Hampshire Avenue, so that it was more convenient for residents in Ward 6 to attend those meetings. Many times when we had those meetings, we also tried to do something beforehand to bring residents in a more informal way. So for example, when we held them in June, which is Immigrant Heritage Month, we would do programming around that as well. So formally moving meetings over there. In addition, we started doing lunches with the mayor in the Crossroads area. We started doing this after the Trump administration got in, because when I toured the businesses in that area, what they said to me was that they had been losing business because residents were not coming out as more. And so we started holding lunches at Sardi's, at La Casita, and many of the other restaurants. And in addition, I invited members of the state delegation as well as the county to make sure that they also saw and talked to residents about what was needed. And I'll tell you, in fact, a couple of those conversations ended up impacting legislation that was going on at the county level, especially when we were debating accessory dwelling units. And I remember we had representatives of the county there who heard from residents and changes were made. So these give opportunities for us to engage both formally and informally. In addition, Councilmember Terry Siemens and I started doing coffees in many of the apartment buildings, because I believe our government needs to go where people are and not always expect people to come to us. And yesterday with Tacoma Engage at our New Hampshire Rec Center is an example of how we're partnering to bring new community engagement models into the city. I think it was a great day. It was very successful, and I'm looking forward to continuing putting in place new models for community.
Thank you. Thank you. Roger, how would you reach out to the words less heard?
Well, one of my heroes is Wangari Maathai, who the Kenyan Nobel Prize winner who developed the Greenbelt program in Africa. And her thinking was that in order for democracy to function well with true inclusivity, the small micro communities have to be activated. And so the priority for me would be on revitalizing and supporting civic organizations in Ward 4, 5, and 6, particularly tenant organizations, tenant associations. And I believe we only have 2 active tenant associations in the city right now. Safety and security are huge concerns for the residents that I've been talking to, as I've focused in the early weeks of the campaign on being in wards 4, 5, and 6. Bringing participation of residents into the city is important. And I think it's not just a matter of reaching out more with our existing committees, but really looking at what kinds of committees might we want to develop that address issues most of concern to renters. For example, childcare is a big concern. Transportation, as I've already mentioned, is a big concern. Recreation programs for the elderly and for people with special needs are a big concern. And safety, working on the police, that's a big concern for people. We also need to make sure that our budget clearly shows how we are allocating resources equitably towards all wards, so that we know for certain that it's not the squeaky wheels that are getting more of the grease.
Thank you. Kate, would you like to add anything?
Just on one thing I want to clarify. I don't know if I heard Roger incorrectly. We definitely have more than 2 tenant associations throughout the city. I don't have the exact number now, but we absolutely have more than 2. In addition, one of the things that we've undertaken over the last couple of years is really rethinking how our committees function and work so that they can be much more inclusive. Some of the ideas that I've wanted to explore, and we've started doing this, is looking at how we might be able to not just provide child, and I also believe it's child and maybe elder care, because there are some members of our community who are providing care to older parents or other members of their family. So we have to think about that, as well as maybe providing a number of communities like College Park provide stipends to people who serve on committees, and looking at ways that we can, when we ask people to volunteer for things, how do we make it more available to a broader array of our residents?
Okay, thank you. Roger, would you like to add anything?
Sure. It's just that the idea of tackling the ratios of participation in committees is an obvious one. It's one that I would have liked to see the city tackling 5 years ago. We have to reorient the thinking of the portion of Tacoma Park that is most active is predominantly white, predominantly homeowners. And as mayor, I would really, really work to reorient people geographically to understand that our community has many front doors, and that in fact our biggest economic engine and effectively our downtown is at Tacoma Langley Crossroads. And it's an area that I revel in visiting. I'm part of the New Hampshire corridor myself at the southern end. And I really think I'm always surprised how many residents don't appreciate the full scope of the city, don't know the boundaries, and don't have their minds centered around every ward in the city. My campaign sign has 6 trees to represent 6 wards.
Thank you. Thank you. Kate, do you have a last word on this topic?
No, I'm glad we're in the last few minutes talking about the Ward 6 area, because I think it's one of the areas, particularly with the Purple Line, what's going to happen with that in question. Even if the state takes over, we could find 6 months of, basically living in a stalled construction zone. It's an area where infrastructure changes need to happen, and it's a vibrant area for small businesses. And so working continuously with the businesses there to support them and to support the local residents has been a top priority over the last couple of years. And I think moving forward, whoever is mayor in the next 2 years, this has to be one of their top priorities, because those businesses absolutely need to survive and those residents need our assistance.
Thank you. Roger?
Yes, I totally agree that Ward 6 is the new front door of Tacoma Park in many ways, assuming that we get through this Purple Line delay. But in the meantime, one of my favorite stores, Sarah Fabrics, is gone. And I don't know if that was the recession or impacts from the construction. I'm happy that our economic development staff are so focused on the crossroads. And I hope that focus continues. We know it's going to be under pressure for all kinds of development. And I want to see our development staff not simply inviting all comers, but demanding community-oriented development.
Well, we are closing in on the end of the second hour, and I'm going to put one more question to you before we go to closing statements. And it's just amazing to me. I have pages and pages of questions and so many follow-ups that I really would like to put to you, but I suppose we can't really schedule an 8-hour forum. So Roger, as 2 white people vying for the office of mayor, what is your responsibility to addressing systemic racism within the city structure? How do you plan to advance racial equity at every level?
My responsibility is to model being a white anti-racist. And I identify as that and have for at least the last 8 or 9 years in my life. I grew up like a lot of white people, not understanding how systemic the problems were and thinking that if I was just kind and colorblind, they would go away. I wake up every day wanting to undermine the system that has privileged people who look like me for so long. How I support that is by standing up with other white residents to help them see that their identities and their lives will be spiritually more whole if they embrace this important work. It's by making sure that the people in the room represent every economic level and every racial and ethnic identity, and demanding that dialogue be held off until those perspectives are represented. It means calling out detours when we have important conversations about race and class that we know are beneath the surface. It's making sure that we don't primarily have predominantly a white contingent of residents who are arguing about the details rather than talking about the fundamental questions of who we are and what we ought to be as a community. At the Junction, I really feel like in a lot of ways, all of the energy put into that, predominantly by white people, has been a detour away from a really hard but constructive conversation that we need to have about how we are going to maintain or build a one Tacoma, build an affordable Tacoma that is truly inclusive and that works against systemic racism. So those are my commitments, and I will model them in everything I do as mayor.
Okay, thank you. And Kate, how do you plan to advance racial equity at every level and address systemic racism within the city structure?
Sure. So one thing is to acknowledge that dismantling 400 years of institutional racism is a process that is an ongoing process. It's not a check the box, we did this. It is really changing all of our systems. And that is one of the things that we have begun over the last couple of years in the city, looking at how we can actually collect data. As we talked about before with our committees, one of the reasons that when we started looking at them, we knew anecdotally our committees were heavily white, heavily homeowners, but we had stopped collecting data on race and ethnicity. Same with some of our rec programs. And so, I'm a researcher by training, and one of the things I think is important is that we collect the data so that we are able to look at what we need to put in place in terms of programming and policies. The other thing is knowing when to step out of the way, knowing when it's important to make sure that we're spending the time listening to the experiences of Black and Brown residents in our community and having them lead the way. Working with Councilwoman Searcy on the task force on reimagining public safety is one of those places that we're really hoping to move this forward. In addition, it's also empowering our staff, making sure they have the training and the tools to get this job done. And we're, we're in the process of doing that. Where new bus shelters are going in the city was driven by a racial equity analysis. How we conduct our meetings with State Highway and other things. We're starting to put those systems in place in our city government. I've been very privileged to serve as the co-chair on the Racial Equity and Leadership Council at the National League of Cities, and I've learned so much from my colleagues there over the last couple of years. And I do see my role as bringing back those learnings to our city, to the residents and the staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger, would you like to add anything?
I guess the thing I would add is that we have to accelerate. The urgency is clear. And we need to go from having a handful of our staff going through racial equity training to having all of our staff and all of our committee members and every council meeting have a teachable moment on racial equity. We need to go beyond participation. And I agree that data collection needs to be crucial. It's just baby steps at this point after 3 years of this racial equity commitment. We still only have a racial equity consideration for city actions rather than a true impact statement or a formula for achieving that. I agree with Reverend Gail Fisher-Stewart, the police department chaplain, that wealth building is crucial. If you're serious about racial equity, you've got to be looking at ways to build wealth for Black, Brown, and immigrant and indigenous people in your community.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Kate, would you like a final word on this?
Sure. I would just two things. One, on the wealth building, completely agree, and why I pushed for and put in place the home stretch down payment assistance program that gets at the generational wealth disparities we have in this country. The second thing is moving forward to accelerate this based on the capacity we have with our staff now. I truly believe we need a chief equity officer in the city. We cannot expect staff who aren't trained, who don't have the tools to put in place a racial equity framework. We need someone who's going to hold us all accountable, residents, the council, the staff, to really accelerate and move this forward. And so I agree, I want to accelerate it, and we need a chief equity officer.
Okay, and Roger, do you have a final word?
Yes, the danger with the chief racial equity officer is that everyone sees them as having the job when this is a full community job. I think the city council and the mayor should function as the chief racial equity officers and make sure that that kind of thinking is embedded in everything that the city does. In the search for a new city manager that will begin shortly, I will insist on having someone who truly is well-versed in racial equity and who has worked to integrate that into changing organizational culture.
Okay, thank you. And I imagine that both of you are exhausted at this point, but if you can put
This is nothing compared to the city council meeting, Eric.
Just give it a little bit of focus for just another minute. We'll go to closing statements, and I'll start with you, Roger, since you gave the first since you gave the opening statement, and that'll give Kate the chance to give the final closing statement. So Roger, you ready to make your closing statement?
Sure. Yeah. So I think I've made it clear why I'm stepping up to serve as mayor. I'm not out to make a huge political career for myself. I've never been a spotlight seeker or a headline grabber. But I do believe that with the urgent issues we face as a globe, as a nation, as a community, Tacoma Park still has a vital role to play in innovating in ways that other communities can imitate. And so to that end, I'm willing to have our community reach farther to do those kinds of innovations. But I want them to be smart. I want them to pay attention to the details. I want them to be affordable, such that they do have ripple effects elsewhere, rather than being idiosyncratic to our one place. As you've heard in today's conversation, I'm a practical progressive. I'm a problem solver by nature. I like getting the details right. I love diving straight into conflict and bringing people together to find resolution. I'm a harmonizer. And one of my big visions is that if we address climate, affordability, and racial equity and economic development all as one piece, all of those pieces can move forward more effectively together. I really believe we have to have goals and measurable objectives that take us beyond words to the concrete results that we can enjoy and be proud of. So I hope I've shown you that I'm a clear person, I'm caring, and that's how I approach problem solving. I hope I presented you with some facts that show how our city council's approaches over the past 5 years have not risen to the challenges we face. I encourage you to find out more at rogerfortacoma.org. I hope I've shared with you my vision and my concrete plans for how to lead the council toward a more responsive and effective government. And I hope I've convinced you on the right choice for mayor as we move forward. And I invite you to be part of this movement and bring your friends and neighbors on board. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And Kate?
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Roger, for this afternoon and this conversation. So I've said in the past that being mayor is one of the toughest and best jobs I've ever had. And I have to say that is saying something, because I've had some really awesome jobs in my lifetime. I was able to start out my career doing public opinion research and owning my own small business and helping organizations such as the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, NRDC forward their mission and goals. Then I was lucky enough to be the executive vice president of Advocates for Youth, a nonprofit that works internationally and domestically with young people to champion their right to sexual health. And now as a researcher and an advisor to help organizations fight back against the Trump administration on women's reproductive rights. I've been very fortunate in the jobs I had. My other job right now is getting very busy after, unfortunately, our huge loss on Friday evening. But what I've learned from all these experiences over the years is that there are small things we do every day. There are things people may not even see, but make a huge difference in our community and in the lives of others. And then there are the big things we do and the big challenges we undertake and need to address. So in the city over the last few years, we've done some small things that may have gone unnoticed, and we've done some big things as well. We've changed all our streetlights to LED. We've taken down racist neighborhood watch signs from the 1980s. In the last few months, we've delivered food. We've secured funding for COVID-19. We've secured testing. We've fundamentally shifted in a very short time how our government works to address the needs for those most in need in our community. And we're really taking a deep dive and looking at public safety now and how we're going to address climate change. And these are all things that we need to work on together in our community. And what I found has been most useful over the years as we take on these tough questions is really to have the courage to have the tough conversations with people and to really work together. As I said before, I'm a researcher and I love to dig into things, and thank you so much.
Okay, and thank you both. And I thought I had this timed out pretty well, but we did go over just a bit. We have Ward 3 candidates in the waiting room of the next Zoom meeting that will be playing over the radio here on WOWD, Tacoma Park Community Radio. Roger Slagle, Kate Stewart, thank you so much for making time to share your thoughts. There's so many more questions I have, and I'm sure that people can find out more about you at your websites and through social media. I can say that it has been a sincere pleasure to talk about these issues with the two of you. And as I always say, thanks to both of you for stepping forward to run for office so the rest of us don't have to. So thank you very much, and we'll be moving on to the Ward 3 Council Forum in just a moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Eric.